Any plans for this evening? Perhaps a game night?
It's game over, man. It's game over.
Shut up. Play the game. Play it from your heart.
26 years ago, we started playing a little game. Now, we're all gonna sit down. We're gonna finish it.
And may the odds be ever in your favor.
And here we go.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Dice Camera Action, a mashup podcast where we discuss both board games and movies. I'm your co-host, Jason Tripp, and I just want to say, Denis Villeneuve for Prime Minister. And today with me is, as always, Matt Cousineau.
Hello. I think Dune Part 2 is kind of BS because I've been drinking worm piss for like 2 weeks and I still can't see the future.
Oh, yes. So today we have plenty of water on hand here on the podcast because we are heading, of course, to Arrakis, the desert planet. That's right, everyone. We are taking a deep dive today into the Dune universe as we explore both the popular board games, Dune Imperium, and the recently released sort of sequel, Dune Imperium Uprising. And we're going to discuss those games in conversation, of course, with our Canadian national treasure, director Denis Villeneuve's visually sumptuous big screen Dune adaptations. But before we go there, as always, we're just going to take a few minutes to share with each other and all of our listeners what we've been up to lately. So, Matt, what have you been up to? What have you been playing? What have you been watching?
Just recently, so I have a 7-year-old, as you know, Charlie. I have a 4-year-old who's not as into games as my 7-year-old Charlie is. But I've been kind of like grooming him into a board game hobbyist like myself.
Nice.
And, in the past we've played tons of tile laying games. They work really well for kids because It's mostly just iconography and map stuff.
Sure.
You're not too worried about any word or reading, or honestly, most tile laying games are fairly simple.
Mechanics are streamlined, right?
Yeah. The mechanics are streamlined, exactly, and the rules are fairly simple. And a kid can play, you can teach them in a few minutes, but it's still a little bit of crunch there for the gamer and me who wants to still have a little bit of a challenge and fun playing with my kid rather than playing Uno or Skippo or whatever, right? So, we've played lots of Land vs. Sea. We've played lots of King Domino, Cascadia, Carcassonne. These are a lot of... And Galaxy Trucker is one of his favorites as well. But I've been very slowly trying to get him into kind of Euro gaming. We played Century Spice Road a few times.
Nice.
Picked that one up. I wanted to introduce like resource management.
Yep.
So he was playing that fairly well right off the bat. He's a really sharp kid. Never ceases to impress me every time we sit down to play a game. He's like blowing my mind. He's already making moves and thinking strategy. And it's been really fun to see his little brain evolve as a gamer. And so recently he's like, Dad, teach me something new. And I was looking at the board game shelf and I see Raiders of the North Sea there.
Great
and I
game.
think this might be too much, but I'll help him.
One way to find out, right?
We'll have fun.
Yeah.
Regardless. We'll have fun messing around with it. I'll teach him the mechanics. I'll help him out when I need to. Not a big deal. And then the game has very little language in it. The only thing is the character cards.
Yeah.
And you don't need to know a ton there. I was able to just kind of run through what each of the dudes do. And that was enough for him to be able to remember and handle that information load in terms of the language on the cards. So I'm running him through the mechanics and everything, and I help him through his first couple of turns just to kind of process the place a worker, take a worker. So should explain the mechanics just really quickly. Essentially, it's a straightforward worker placement game. The twist on it is that in the village where all the action worker placement locations are, there's already 3 workers sitting on 3 of those locations, and then you always have your worker. What you'll do is you'll take your worker, choose a location, take that action, and then you're going to take one of the workers that was already there and take the action from where it was sitting. So you're going to place a worker, take a worker, and get 2 actions on your turn. And essentially what you're doing is when you're doing that, you're prepping for a raid. and you're going to get provisions, you're going to hire crew, you're going to pick up cards, you're going to get resources. You're going to kind of set yourself up. And then when you're ready, you're going to go to the second half of the board where there's a whole bunch of villages, monasteries, all kinds of different locations where you're going to go and you're going to raid. You're going to send your worker there, and you're going to take all the loot and things and resources that were there for points, etc. So all that being said, I was able to teach my 7-year-old, take 10 minutes, help him through his first couple of turns.
How'd he do?
He beat me.
Come on.
He beat me. I'm not going to say that I took it easy on him, but I didn't kind of necessarily try to min-max maybe as much as I usually would.
Sure.
I'm also trying to help him here and there and make sure that he's understanding everything, make sure that he's having fun.
Picked it up pretty quick then.
Picked it up real quick, and I would say he legitimately beat me. And I was really impressed. He picked a lane, and he went for it hard. Basically, he decided he wanted to have the strongest team. Yeah. Built up the strongest team. Brought his... there's like a power track where you can like increase your military strength. Went hard after that. Maxed it out. And then just started plundering and hitting these places. And like, I'm kind of playing the long game, trying to set things up for fun, trying to max... And then he's just like running away with
it.
Yeah, so he did really good, and it was super fun to watch him do that. So kind of a proud daddy moment there.
Absolutely. That's Raiders of the North Sea for those who aren't familiar with the game. And hey, shout out to those next generation gamers. So if you've got young children like Matt, don't underestimate them. See what they can handle, pull out a new game, explore it, and create some good experiences. And we have a responsibility to train up the next generation of gamers and movie enthusiasts. Awesome. So a game that I've been playing, one that you mentioned briefly, one that's probably familiar to most of our listeners, popular game, Cascadia. That's been getting to the table semi-regularly at our place. Again, that's a good one for my kids. I have two children. I have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old. And like you and your kids, they've been playing games their whole lives. I have one of my two children will sit down and play a lengthy strategy game. So my son will play, Star Wars Rebellion, or we'll pull out the chunky games. My daughter, if it's like over 45 minutes, she's tapped out. So Cascadia is nice because there's enough thinking going on, but it's not too heavy that she'll become disinterested or disengaged. So we've been playing a lot with the Landmark expansion as well. I think once we bought that, we're not going back to the regular one. For those unfamiliar with the game, it's just a beautiful nature theme game. So you're selecting a tile each round from a common pool. There's 4 tiles available. You grab one of those and you pair it with a particular animal. Cascadia refers to the Pacific Northwest region, so you got different type of landscapes, from forest to sort of grasslands, wetlands, and then you've got all the animals that reside in that area as well. So you've got your elk and your hawks and your bears, your salmon, and so you're trying to strategically expand your territory. You're building your own. You're taking these sort of hexagonal tiles, laying them down, connecting them, getting points for how big your various landmark or landscapes are. But also you've got certain cards that give you points for how well you do with the animal placement. So only certain animals can fit on certain tiles with the iconography. So you're trying to mix and match strategically to try and maximize your scoring. And the Landmark expansion adds a couple neat features and other ways to get points to actually physically put these sort of 3-dimensional landmarks. When you get a certain amount of terrain of the same type, you qualify to grab one of those, which gives you more points, but then it limits the space moving forward where you can put stuff. So it becomes a tighter game. So there's a bit of push and pull there. So we've been getting a lot of gameplay with that. That's one, too, when we have friends over, some that aren't big gamers, that's a good sort of gateway game as well. So we've been getting a lot of gameplay with Cascadia, in particular the Landmark expansion.
Yeah, we'll say it's a really great one for either beginner gamers, non-gamers, or people that just don't like a big, chunky game like your daughter, for example, or if time is a concern. What I really like about it, it's very free-flowing, very freeing, kind of do what you want. You can mess up as much as you want. You might not score well, but you can basically do whatever you want to do in that game. You contrast that to a game like Calico, where every tile
So critically important,
is like
right?
so critically important. The game is so tight. You feel like you're sweating the whole time trying to make a decision. Whereas Cascadia is very free flowing, kind of put your tiles where you want, try to maximize your stuff, and it's just like fun to build that puzzle out.
Yeah, and it's aesthetically pleasing as well. It's always
Yeah.
a good experience, right? Win or lose. I mean, obviously you want to win, but when the game goes back in the box, I never had people complain that they didn't enjoy the experience of playing the game.
For sure.
What about anything you've been viewing, shows, movies lately, Matt?
Yeah, a couple of shows. I just finished not long ago For All Mankind. Are you familiar with the show at all?
Not at all.
Okay. So
I pick my shows very sparingly, so this is a good education for me to kind of take notes. Oh, I got to watch this show.
Yeah.
I'm a movie guy.
So it is a I almost use the word science fiction, but it's not. It just happens to be set in a lot of it in space. But basically, it is a alternate history show that starts in the 1960s at the moon landing. And essentially, the show kind of puts into place this question of what if the Russians had won the space race?
Interesting.
So the very first episode, the very first thing we see is like this dramatic kind of showing of the moon landing. And from the perspective of Earth and the people watching, right? So we're in like Americans' bedroom, we're in Americans' living rooms watching on TV. We're in bars and all of these different kind of settings, and everybody's watching the moon landing on TV. And they don't kind of hint.
But it's the Russian moon landing.
That's right.
Okay, yeah.
So then, there's the
twist.
announcer talking about this momentous occasion for mankind, blah, blah, blah. And then, the astronaut, or I should say cosmonaut, kind of takes a step onto the moon.
You're expecting Neil Armstrong, but it's not,
turns
right?
around, looks at the camera, and starts speaking in Russian.
Yeah.
So pretty neat moment. It's in the first 15 minutes of the show.
Right.
So, I wouldn't call it spoiler territory.
No,
but
sets up the theme. Yeah.
it sets up the theme very nicely. And so basically, this lights a fire under the the American presidency and NASA, and so they decide they've got to do something as well. Something momentous and important, whatever, right? And so, of course, they have their moon landing shortly after because they just lost the race, but they were also going. And so, basically, they pour way more money into NASA than they would have otherwise, and we start to see, basically the progression of NASA and the technology to do space travel a little bit quicker than what we would have seen potentially otherwise. At least that's what the show suggests or shows us. And it's just really great. By the end of the first season, one of their main goals is to have the first woman on the moon, and be the first this and the first that. And they're really pushing themselves. And what I would say is the most interesting and fun thing about this show is that the format that it takes is very different than what we've seen in other kind of dramatic shows like this.
How so?
They use time jumps in really fun and interesting ways. The first season is all pretty compact in terms of time. But then they're essentially taking a time jump at the end of the first season going into the second season of like 10, 15 years.
Interesting.
So we do see a lot of the same characters come back. We see some of their children become important in the show.
So you got these 10, 15-year gaps between seasons.
Between seasons, and then sometimes mid-season we even have some pretty significant jumps. But what they're doing is it's really satisfying because they talk about these major projects. Oh, we really have to do this to catch up, and that's going to take this and this and this. And then like 2 episodes later, we've done it. We're there. They've achieved the thing. They've explained how and why and where they are now, and it changes the stakes of the show, and it changes what's important. So it's really propulsive in that way. I guess unintended.
Yeah, propulsive. No pun intended. And I imagine it allows you to kind of go deeper with the characters too, right? We're hanging out with these characters, so to see their interesting character arcs that they and their children take throughout, you can really do a lot, right? So you're not just like in and out. Oh, I wanted more time with that character. Well, you're going to get plenty of time, not only in this age of their life, but moving forward, right? To see how they grow and respond, to situations.
It is interesting to see the growth. You would think that with these big time jumps that you would lose time, that you wouldn't be enough character development or focus on characters, but they've done it in such a way that you really are invested in these characters, and you see them over the course of their whole different sections of their career and lives, which is something we don't often see. But it's just very satisfying because they're talking about these wicked projects that they're going to do. And I don't want to spoil anything because there's 4 seasons of this. But they're talking about these massive projects, not just the moon landing, but potentially beyond. And it's very satisfying because you get to see it.
Right.
Whereas in a show like this, they might talk about technology and things that are only going to be available 20, 30, 40 years in the future. We figure you're not going to get there in a season of television or in a couple of seasons of television, but they do. And that's really fun.
Right. So that's For All Mankind. You perked my interest. Usually I consume my shows over the summer months, so we're recording this in spring. So once we hit summer, maybe summer rainy days, I'll binge through that one.
Yeah, it's very bingeable.
For All Mankind. Looking forward to it. All right. Well, I'm more of a movie guy than a show guy, so I want to talk briefly about a small little indie film. So we're talking about this expansive Dune movie today. This is a very small scale little indie film by a Japanese director that I've loved in recent years. His name's Ryusuke Hamaguchi. Those of you who've been following Oscar season over the years might recall a film called Drive My Car that was surprisingly nominated for, I think deservedly so, for Best Picture a couple of years ago. This is his follow-up film, and it's called Evil Does Not Exist. And it's an interesting pairing with Cascadia. This would actually be a good pairing for an episode here at Dice Camera Action, because it much like Cascadia Game, it's got a very much a nature theme, ecological preservation, drama, thriller, but it takes place in a small fictional Japanese village, and these villagers are just living off the land. They're a small tight-knit community, but then in the first third of the movie, they get word that this sort of corporation, this company is coming in because they've identified and purchased a plot of land in their area that they want to set up as a glamping site. Those of you who are familiar with the term glamping, so think glamorous camping, where people from Tokyo, from the big city, can come and they can do their glamping. And so there's sort of a talent industry, tourist industry. Of course, this
glamping, the only kind of camping that I'll do.
Yeah. So they're not exactly roughing it, but this, so they set up a town hall meeting, and this is glacial pace. This is a very slow, methodical pace movie. So if that's not your jam, full disclosure, but I found it very engaging. It was beautiful cinematography, and it felt very real. Almost felt like watching a documentary. So there's this 20-minute scene where they're having this town hall meeting and this Q&A, and they're questioning some of their concerns with, why are you putting the septic tank here? The dirty water is going to run down, and it's kind of a metaphor, much like Parasite, for what the high class do. There's consequences for sort of the lower class, not necessarily the lower class, but those that are living a simpler life in nature. And so there's a back and forth, and then those who come on behalf of the company giving this pitch, this presentation, their moral compass and conscience is a bit pricked, and they're basically realizing, maybe this isn't the best idea. And so they go back to talk to their employers, and the employer's like, no, we got to push this through. And then there's some back and forth, and then, I won't spoil the ending, but it's a real shocking ending. Things just sort of bubble over. There's a moment of shock at the end of the film between the protagonist, the young sort of jack-of-all-trades guy in the village, and the outing out this glamping site. So it's called Evil Does Not Exist. If you're interested in a theme of ecology, ecological preservation, if you want a smartly written, slow film with beautiful score and cinematography, I highly recommend it. It's one that has kept me thinking the last few days since seeing it. And hey, it's a good pairing with Cascadia, as luck would have it. So that's what I've been up to lately.
Very cool. So I guess let's get into our main reviews before we jump into the game and these movies. This was pretty obvious pairing.
We didn't have to think real hard about what to pair the Dune board game with.
No, I will say, if you're thinking about pairing the Dune movies, there are a good handful of Dune-themed games out there. Dune Imperium being one of my all-time favorite games. I think, obviously, we landed there for that reason, and one of your favorites as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And probably the most popular Dune game at this point that's ever existed.
Yeah, I think it's number 6 as of this recording on Board Game Geek, so that's super hot game.
Yeah, it's a hot game. Dune Imperium Uprising has recently come out too, and has also been very hot since and rising the charts. So it was a pretty easy decision. There are plenty of other Dune games. Have you played any others?
Yeah, I just picked up the card playing Arrakis, the Desert Planet game.
Okay, it's a card game?
Yeah, it's a card game. That's just in the last couple of years that one's come out.
Okay.
And I see on your shelf here, you've got the monster
I've
from
got the new
Simon.
yeah, Dune War for Arrakis. I guess I could talk about that super quickly before we jump in.
Sure.
It could have been an option, but you hadn't played it. It's brand new, so I've only played it 3-4 times.
I get the impression it's kind of like Star Wars Rebellion. Would it be equivalent?
I would say it's a
two-player, right?
Yeah, it's a 2-player only. Well, just like Star Wars Rebellion.
Yeah.
It's a 2-player game that has a 4-player variant.
But really, it's 2 teams. One
if
person
you want
plays.
to team up with a buddy and play.
One team plays the Fremen, correct? And
that's right. And then
one plays the Harkonnens, or who?
The Harkonnens.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
All right.
Yeah. So it's the Fremen versus the Harkonnens, and yeah, I would say it's a cross between War for the Ring, War of the Ring,
War of the
excuse
Ring, Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
and Star Wars Rebellion.
Okay.
War of the Ring because it's the same designers, and
Right.
and I haven't played War of the Ring, but I've been told that a lot of the mechanics are similar.
Okay.
And then I compare it very much to Star Wars Rebellion because, well, for 2 reasons. One, it's a 1v1 war game
Yep.
with minis and a huge map, etc. But secondly, it's about this like massive force that has control of a territory and a plucky little rebellion that's trying to, mess with the big power that is currently in place.
Well, that makes perfect sense because the core literature, the Dune literature from Frank Herbert, was very much an inspiration to George Lucas and the Star Wars universe. So it makes sense that
That's
the
true,
games would
yeah.
have a similar vibe because Dune is sort of the spiritual successor to Star Wars. And, well, Lord of the Rings is kind of a spiritual successor to Dune, right? They all sort of fit together
You're
thematically.
right,
Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's really great, and like I've kind of put a lot of thought into that game versus Star Wars Rebellion, and Rebellion's one of my all-time favorite games.
Yeah.
There is a possibility after playing Dune War for Arrakis that it ends up kind of replacing it.
Okay. Wow,
Not
it's
because
that good,
not because it's like a better game, head and shoulders a better game than Star Wars Rebellion, but because it is
Is it smoother gameplay?
much smoother
Yeah.
to get to the table,
Yep.
easier to teach,
Yeah,
much quicker to play.
Okay.
Plays in a couple of, like, once both players know how to play,
Couple hours.
a couple hours.
Yeah,
For your
whereas
first game where you're
Rebellion-
figuring things out, it's going to
Yeah.
take maybe 3-4 hours. But once both players are familiar,
Yeah.
like I've played this now with my friend Ian a couple of times,
Nice.
and even on our second game, we were done in maybe 2.5 hours. So you're talking about a game that's going to play in a much shorter period of time. A game that feels as thematic, honestly,
Sure.
as Rebellion.
Is it very balanced? Did you find it's tougher for the Fremen early on, getting to know the game? Or?
Hard to tell again
Okay.
because we've only had
Sure.
so few plays of it.
Sure.
But yes, it definitely feels like the Harkonnens have an advantage.
Right.
But if you go in knowing that, as the Fremen player, going, this is going to be an uphill battle,
Yeah.
and I've got to try to figure out a way.
Right.
There's tension there.
It's a fun challenge, too. Yeah.
And it is a fun challenge. And then you kind of set it up in a way that if you're the more experienced player, you play the Fremen. And then if you're playing with a friend who has as much experience and you're fairly even, then you just take turns.
Sure.
So I think even if it's not fully balanced, there's definitely the possibility and the ability for the Fremen to win
Right.
if they play really well and they'll get a little bit of luck maybe.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a fun and interesting challenge.
Yeah.
So yeah, just for ease of play and time of play, I think that Dune War for Arrakis may end up sort of replacing Star Wars Rebellion.
Yeah.
I'll never get rid of Rebellion because
No.
I'm a huge Star Wars fan and
Sure.
it's just not going anywhere.
No.
But Yeah, it's been an interesting kind of like battle in my own head that's been going on between those two games.
Yeah, so if you're looking for a 2-player game with some sweet minis, high production quality, bit of a price tag for that. I don't know, it's a couple $100, I think.
Canadian, you're looking at 150 to 180.
Right.
US, you're looking probably 120 or so.
It's not too bad. Yeah. All right, so that's Dune War for Arrakis, but the games we've chosen to kind of do a deeper dive into is the most popular one, as Matt mentioned, Dune Imperium, and the recent sort of sequel, I guess we could call it. It takes Dune Imperium and adds some interesting elements to Dune Imperium Uprising.
I would call it a 2.0. I'm not sure what the marketing strategy was with releasing Dune Uprising and why it wasn't made super clear that this, for me, is kind of a new edition, like a 2.0 of Dune Imperium. There's been a little bit of discussion of that in the community. A lot of people seem to think that it's a little too swingy. I think that's just part of the gameplay, and if you go in knowing that, you can kind of try to set yourself up in the early game to make sure that it swings your way more than other people's ways. We could talk about that a little bit more once we get into the nitty gritty.
Yeah, I think obviously as far as marketing strategy, Dune Imperium was released sort of in tandem with Dune Part 1, the movie, which we'll talk about, and Dune Imperium Uprising seemed to coincide with the release of Dune Part 2. So I'm sure there's some crossover marketing strategies there. That's sort of the financial marketing side of things. But yeah, it is more of a 2.0 than a new game. I will say this right out of the gate, like if those of you listening, if you have Dune Imperium and you have the expansions, they pair with Dune Imperium Uprising as well. I have not played them, but I'm told they're all compatible, right, Matt?
For sure, yeah. And they've even said, like, if you like some of the character cards,
you
like
can pick and choose, or you can customize it, right?
Yeah, you can bring in some of the old cards, even some of the actual Imperium row cards, like the main deck. You can mix and match. You can do what you like.
Right.
I've kind of kept them separate. That's just a personal preference, but they have said you can if you want.
You can mix and match as you see fit, which is great. Well, let's give some credit where credit is due. So designer Paul Denin has designed both Imperium and Imperium Uprising. Some of you might know him from the Clank, and certainly when we get to the mechanics, there's a bit of a crossover, certainly similar to the Clank games. Those of you who are fans of that, whether it's the original Clank or the Clank in Space, I see on your shelf here, Matt, where we're recording. So published by Dire Wolf. Plays in 1 to 2 hours, and I think that's accurate, right? Depending on player count, it is a 1 to 4 player game. And when we talk about the differences between Imperium and Uprising, we'll talk a little bit about player count. But there is a cool little 3v3 sort of team option with Uprising, which allows for the 6 players around the table. But really, it's 2 teams. But it's not like the other Dune game we were just talking about, Star Wars Rebellion, where it's just an extra player pasted on. Each player actually has their own sort of things to do, right? So it really does feel like a 6-player game, but you're working in tandem with your teammates around the table, which is interesting. So Dune Imperium, for those who aren't familiar, and many of you probably are, it's a game that uses a variety of mechanics. There's a deck building element to it to add some hidden information angle to traditional worker placement games. So there's a worker placement aspect to it. There's a little bit of combat each round in the game as well. And in the game, as a leader of one of the great houses of the Landsraad, you raise your banner, marshal your forces and your spies. War is coming, and at the center of the conflict is, of course, Arrakis, the Dune planet, the desert planet. Maybe we can talk a little bit about the mechanics, maybe for those that are unfamiliar, Matt. We start with the base, the 1.0, the Imperium, and then we can talk a little bit about what's added for those that are interested in hearing about maybe making a decision should they buy the Uprising. We can talk a little bit about the additions to that game.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dune Imperium is primarily a worker placement game with a deck building element. It's been talked a lot about being a even parts deck building game and a worker placement game,
which I love.
But my argument, I would say, is that it's the I would not call it even parts. I would say that it's mostly a worker placement game with a deck building element.
See, and I don't know if I would totally agree on that. We thought this was going to be like the most agreeable podcast. I got to push back a little because
let's hear it.
You've only got 2 maximum 3 workers, right? So I think it's even parts because you need to plan to collect the right cards that pair well together and allow you to go to the certain spaces on the board. There's iconography on each card. It's colors and shapes that say, okay, if I play this card, that allows me to go to these spots. But I spend more of my time thinking, which cards do I want to put in my hand that allows me to open up the board for my workers? So I'm actually thinking the more I play it, because when I first started, it was like worker, where would I go? Now I think as I've played it more, I'm like, okay, I got to make sure I pair the correct cards, because the times that I've lost because my opponent is being more strategic about what they're building in their hand, what cards they're actually burning, getting rid of. And so I think there's a lot of interesting choices with the deck building that flow into the worker placement.
Right. I think a lot of the deck building parts that you're talking about directly, the reason you're getting certain cards is for the worker placement. Like it's feeding the worker placement mechanic, and I guess that's why
But they go hand in hand, right?
It's primarily a worker placement because even a lot of the cards that you're buying from the Imperium row, you're buying because they're going to let you go to a certain space for your worker placement. So it's almost like a support to the worker placement.
But also some of those cards will give you points. Some of them will add to your conflict. So the cards do more than just dictate where you go. That's certainly part of it. But the cards, the beauty of the card system in this game is there are 2 options with every card. Because you only have limited worker placement. You got 5 cards in hand every round to start. You can pick up more depending where you go.
We haven't gone through the main mechanics of the game, so maybe we can.
Back the truck up a bit, right? So you've got this board, and on the board you've got a variety of spaces. I don't know. We don't have the board in front of us, but you've probably got approximately 20 options, I'd say, anyway, where you can go.
Yeah.
And they're color coded. You've got yellow triangles and blue circles and green hexagons. And then you've got 4 sort of tracks that you can work up through the game. And so
they each represent like houses.
They each represent
factions,
a faction, 4 faction tracks. And as you get a certain distance up those tracks, you gain victory points, you gain resources. The resources in the game are water and spice, just like in the films we're going to discuss. And Solari, which is your currency.
That's right.
Those are your 3 resources throughout the game, and you're going to be collecting those. And sometimes to go to certain spots, you are required to have a certain amount of resources in your possession. So if you want to go to the spots that reap the biggest rewards, and there's some pretty lucrative spots. But you have to make sure, like, there's some spot you need to have like 4 or 5 spice in your possession, which is hard to get your hands on, or a couple of water, which, true to the books, true to the movies, water is pretty scarce on the planet, and it's pretty scarce in the game as well. Spend them wisely as you collect them. And so based on the resources you have, based on the cards that you have, so everybody gets a starter deck of 10 cards. You shuffle the same decks, you shuffle those up, and you grab 5 off the top, and that's your starting hand. And you've got 2 workers that you can deploy each round to start. There is opportunity in one spot to gain a 3rd worker, but that costs, I believe, 8. I think it's 8 Solari that
Depends
costs,
on
right?
if we're talking about Imperium.
That's true. Yeah, we're talking about with Imperium for now. So in the base game, either one, it costs you a small fortune, right? It's pricey, but it unlocks that 3rd worker every turn, which is huge. So first round, you've got basically 2 plays, and you've got 5 cards. And so out of your hand, you're only going to be using 2 of your 5 cards to use the deploy option, basically pairing whatever iconography is on that to allow you to access certain spaces on the board. And so you'll lay one of your 2 cards down, and then you'll deploy your worker there and collect the appropriate resources based on the space that you go. But you do that twice, and then you have 3 cards left in hand. So any card that you didn't use to deploy one of your workers, when you have your lay down reveal, your reveal turn, you'll basically, when it comes around to you and you have no more workers, you'll lay down those 3 cards, or more if you collected more cards. Some spaces allow you to collect more. And then you'll have these sort of blue diamond symbols with numbers on them on your cards. When you total up all those numbers, that corresponds to I don't know the
What's your-
verbiage,
I
but
think
your
it's
influence. I always
Yeah.
call it your spending power, buying power, but much like Clank, if you know the Clank game, that allows you to build your deck. So if I've got a value of 5, I can look, and there's always, I think, 5 available cards that are up for grabs. And so I can be looking ahead and say, oh, there's one value 5, so I'm going to snag that card. It doesn't go immediately into your hand. It goes in your discard pile, but that will cycle through your deck. So part of the strategy, the deck building part of the strategy is, okay, there's a bit of a push and pull, a tug of war. Like, do I want to use this card to go to this space, but it's got a value of 2 or an influence value of 2. Maybe I want to keep it in my hand because I really want this card that's a value 6 or 7 because of the rewards it gives you. So there's some interesting tension with not only what cards to play, but how to use the cards, to use it to deploy or to use it for the influence. And so as you build your deck, certainly too, you don't want to have your weaker starter cards clogging up your deck. So you might, from time to time, you want to go in spaces where you can offload those cards so you can cycle through and get your big cards that you've added to your deck. You want to see them more regularly, more frequently throughout the game to give you the highest value and resources possible. So that's a little bit about the mechanics, Matt. I'm sure you can fill in some of the gaps, but in the conflict portion too, we'll need to talk about that as well.
That's exactly what I was going to get to, is like from all of the descriptions you've just kind of laid out.
At the end of each round, there is a conflict, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it all sounds very Euro game, right? The worker placement, deck building, resource management,
And this is-
multi-use cards.
Yeah.
But ultimately,
The third component is conflict, which
That's
is a
right.
beautiful mix of worker placement, deck building, and some conflict. So why don't you walk us through how the conflict works in the
So
game?
this is my favorite kind of player interaction. I don't necessarily like a take that or a player interaction where I'm tearing down what you've been building, or you set up the whole game towards this goal, and I can just come in and kick your sandcastle to the ground.
My wife hates those games. Well, she's like, I just want to play. I want to do my own thing, and no one can touch me.
Which is totally fine. You know, I do enjoy some of these games as well. But in this game, it's nice because we're not tearing each other down, but we are competing for something.
There's a little bit.
We're
of take
racing for something essentially, which is what I really love. So at the beginning of each round, there's a conflict card that gets flipped over, and on this conflict card, it'll tell you whoever wins the conflict will get X rewards. Whoever gets second place in the conflict will get these lesser rewards. And whoever wins third place in the conflict will get these lesser rewards, the even lesser rewards.
based on the number of armies or soldiers in the conflict
That's right.
zone on the board. Right?
So there is a section of the board that is called the conflict area. And we each have a garrison, a place where we can keep our little cubes, which represents...
in reserve, yeah.
Yeah, troops in the conflict. And then there's a handful of spaces on the board that are conflict spaces. They have this little symbol in it. So when you go there, you get your water, you'll get your spice, your solar, you'll get whatever it is that you get from going to that
Right.
space.
But if it has, like, I think it's like 2 swords crossed on the
That's
space,
right,
if you see
yeah.
that allows you to put, I think it's 2, right?
You could push 2 units into the conflict.
Plus any units you might get from that space already.
From that space or from your card, any
Yes.
units you got during that turn, you can push into the conflict.
You don't have to. You can put them in your reserves.
That's right.
Or in the
and you
conflict.
can push 2 extra from your garrison.
Correct.
From the outside of the conflict, but ready units, basically. And so as we're kind of going through our turns in clockwise order around the board, people are trickling in and putting in units into the conflict, and you're getting an idea of who might be pushing in, who might not be, and that kind of thing. And then once we've all done all of our agent turns, and we've all done our reveal turns, and purchased our cards, then there's the conflict stage of the round, where everybody has an opportunity to play conflict cards, which they may have purchased or gotten over the course of the round.
Intrigue cards. Yeah.
Intrigue cards, yes, thank you. So, and of these intrigue cards, some of them are conflict cards that you can play to actually push more troops in, add more power to your conflict, maybe retreat troops, do all kinds of different things that have to do with the conflict. And then once everybody's kind of like played these cards or not, we determine who's gotten the most power, and then they get that first reward and on down.
Yeah, we should say that each sort of cube signifies a power of 2. So there's a conflict track that you add the running total. But on some of the cards that you haven't played to deploy, or on some of these intrigue cards, there will be physical red sword symbols, and those each are a value of 1. And so as you're doing your reveal turn, not only are you looking at your influence to buy a card, but you're also looking at any of those sword symbols to add value to troops that you already have in the battle. If you don't have any troops in the battle, those sword symbols won't give you additional power. So those are a way where you can sneakily sort of bypass someone who thinks they're winning the conflict, but you might have an intrigue card up your sleeve that you can reveal at the opportune time, or some of those in your reveal turn will give you that extra power needed. The conflict's interesting for that reason, but it's also interesting because there are level 1, level 2, and level 3 conflict rounds, and as the game progresses, the rewards will get higher and higher. So it's that tension of, do I want to win an early battle, or do I want to sit back and keep a bunch in reserve to wait for the bigger spoils, the bigger rewards, right? And so there's a lot of interesting decisions with not only how much to put in the conflict, but if and when I want to put anything in the conflict. So basically it works well together, because between the worker placement, the deck building, and conflict, it's beautiful.
Yeah, and it does create this like tension every single round.
Every single turn, every single round. Yeah.
Has this like end game tension to it to see who's going to win the conflict, especially if you're invested in that conflict. Because as you said, you may not jump into this one and try to hold your troops and your resources to kind of take down the next one. So yeah, there is that conflict that takes place in every round, which adds a lot of tension and a lot of fun as well. But again, it is the type of player interaction that is not necessarily taking down or messing with what others have been working on. Yeah.
I mentioned earlier a lot of the spaces on the board. There's these 4 sort of faction tracks. So when you get kind of, I think 3 steps up to each faction track, you get a victory point. We should say this game only goes to 10.
10 victory points.
When someone hits 10, that triggers the last round of the game. And I've never played a game of this where it wasn't a really tight finish. One of the beautiful things of this game is you're never out of it. Like last place will usually be like 7, so you're within striking distance, right? As long as you know what you're doing. And there's multiple paths, right? You can kind of go heavy on the conflict and try and get as many victory points, or you could just keep pushing up these faction tracks, because you have the ability in theory to get 8 victory points on these 4 faction tracks.
That's right.
You get halfway up, you get a victory point, then you get, I think it's 5 or 6 steps up, and you actually get to take a physical alliance token off the track that comes into your possession that gives you a victory point. But that's what I like to call a soft victory point, because it could be in your possession, but if someone goes beyond you on the track, you have to physically give the token to the other player, bumping you down a victory point and them up a victory point. So the only way you can make that secure is if you hit the sort of ceiling on that track, and that absolutely secures that second victory point. So there's multiple paths to victory. You can go heavy on the conflict route. You can go heavy on the spice route and just try and hit those heavy spaces a few times throughout the game. There's even this card called Spice Must Flow, and I believe it costs you 9 influence. So you
very difficult to get,
but if you can get a big hand of more than 5 cards, if you can kind of have cards that give you more cards in hand, and when you do your reveal, if you have 9 or more, you can just take one of those cards, and that's an automatic victory point every time as well. So there's different ways that you can sort of squeeze out that extra point or two that you want, and it becomes down to a really tight final round. That final conflict sometimes makes all the difference, or the final turn might swing things. So it's pretty heated, and it's one of those games where it's so immersive that, like, I got water on the table here because I'm just getting thirsty talking about it. I feel like I'm at the Dune Desert Planet here, right? So always have water or a drink on hand when you're playing this game, because it's pretty immersive, it's very thematic, and it's one of our favorites.
Yeah, for a mostly Euro game, I do find it fairly thematic. Especially if you know the books and or movies fairly well. Then you start looking at the art, you start seeing the connections between the art and what the card's doing and how you're using them, and it does feel a lot more thematic than you would expect from a mostly Euro game. And
we should say too that it's sort of asymmetrical in a sense that everybody gets sort of a starting card faction, and so everybody has sort of a unique special power. Everybody has this one card in your starter deck that has a little signet ring on it. When you play that card, it unlocks sort of a unique ability, whether you're Paul Atreides or you're the Harkonnens or whoever you are. There's multiple characters, and they each have a unique ability, maybe giving you more water or more spice or more Solari throughout the game, more cards in hand. And so that's kind of neat too. You want to customize your gameplay to try and maximize your special asymmetrical power too. I love games like that.
Yeah.
Root comes to mind, and some other games with similar ideas.
Yeah, so Dune Imperium was my all-time favorite game. I had purchased, and I'm looking at them now on my game shelf, but Dune Rise of Ix, which is...
Is that the first expansion that was released?
Yes, it was, yeah. And then there was Dune Immortality, and they're both really great expansions, and if I'm playing the original Dune Imperium, I would play with all three components, the game and the 2 expansions.
Sure.
Shortly after Immortality came out, I think within a year, then we got Dune Imperium Uprising, which just came out, I want to say, 3-4 months ago. Maybe a little longer.
Yeah, and you introduced me to that recently, so maybe we can talk about, because maybe there's people listening, they have Imperium, thinking, is it worth the cost to get the Uprising version? So maybe, Matt, you can sell us on what Uprising adds to the game and kind of give your feedback.
Right, so it being my favorite game of all time and being somewhat of a collector, I was gonna get this no matter what. Do you need it? No. If you love Dune Imperium and you've got, Rise of Ix, I think you're in great shape with that game, and it's well balanced. And I think that there's a few imbalances and imperfections and minor issues with the original game that I think that the 2 expansions really did a great job in kind of like curbing those issues.
But does it have worms?
It doesn't, no. So
spoiler alert.
Yeah,
Let's talk about
Dune
the worms.
Imperium Uprising is I just call it's a Dune Imperium 2.0.
Sure.
I feel like it takes care of a lot of the minor imbalances and issues that the original game has. It adds a few more interesting and exciting elements, and I think it's worth picking up no matter what. But if this isn't one of your favorite games and you just play it every once in a while and you have the original, you're probably fine to just hang on to that. But if you really want to push the envelope and see what the Dune, games have to offer, I think this is a total no-brainer.
Yeah.
And it's more or less replaced the original.
Sure.
For me. And it does give you the option of, like you said earlier, mixing and matching and adding the expansions.
Yeah, it's customizable, right? Which
Uprising.
is nice. Yeah, you can make it your own.
Haven't done it yet, but I definitely it's something that I want to try soon.
So let's talk about the little elements that are added in Uprising. Not only does it sort of change a little bit about the iconography on the board, some of the spots are different to try and balance it out.
I wouldn't even use the word little. I think
significant.
The cards and the spaces are significantly different.
But it adds fresh new elements as well. And
yes.
Maybe let's talk about
so
those.
Not only does it kind of... My guess is that after, so many games of Dune Imperium and it being out in the wild, that they felt like they could improve the game pretty significantly by just taking the exact same mechanics and just redesigning the game and elevating it by changing a bunch of the spaces. Not major changes, but like one thing we've talked about already is getting your Swordmaster, which is your third worker,
yes,
now costs 6
instead of 8. Yeah.
Actually, no. I think it does cost 8 for the first person.
Right.
But then the
first
second person
yes,
and beyond to go there then costs 6.
Which is nice.
Because being the first person to get your Swordmaster was a massive advantage.
Yep.
So it's just one example of a small tweak they made
balances it out.
That really balances things out.
Mm-hmm.
And they've done this with a bunch of spaces, and I think they've done a great job.
Now, one of the frustrating pieces in the original game, it's strategic, but it's frustrating, is like, I need to go to that spot. Mm-hmm. But Matt has already taken that spot, and I really need to go to that spot.
Typical worker placement.
Right. But they've added sort of an element, an interesting element here with I believe it's a spy element. You talk a little bit about the spy, how those work, and how it sort of opens up the board a little more?
Yeah, so basically every space has... I'm not sure how I would explain this. So every space has a connected little area where you could put a spy. And this spot for your spy might be connected to 2 or 3 other locations on the board. But the way it works, and it's basically a new symbol in the game. It looks like a little cylinder.
Yep.
Because your piece that represents your spy is a little cylinder of your player color. Anytime you activate this new icon of this spy cylinder, you can take a spy and place it on any spy location, and all of these spy locations are connected to 1 to 3 other worker placement locations. Essentially, sort of reserving a spot for you. When I say reserving, it doesn't mean that somebody else can't go there, but it means that if somebody else is already there, you can still go there.
You can slide in there, yeah.
And then basically you just have to spend that spy. So your spy goes on the location first. Then it makes it so that any location attached to that spy is still available to you, even if somebody else has gone there first.
Right. So, for example, the Swordmaster space you were just talking about, maybe you and I both have enough Solari. We want to get our third worker in place. I'm sensing that you're going to clog up that space. So if I put a spy attached to that space, that now allows me access, which is great too, because if you go there first, you got to pay 8. I can still go there the same turn necessarily and pay 6. So there's strategic value in where and when to lay down those spies. And I think there's a maximum you can put on the board. Is it 3 you can have?
You only
out
have
there?
access
Yeah,
to
you
3
only have
spies.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you still have to do that fairly strategically and be careful about where you're putting them and how you're using them. It's not a situation where no matter what, if somebody goes where you want to go, that you'll always be able to go there because of your spy.
Right.
You still have a limited number of spies, and they're not that easy to get out. You have to have cards to do it, or you have to go to specific spaces on the board. It's not just a free-for-all. You still have to work to make those spaces available to you.
Right.
There's a secondary use for these spies as well. If you're going to a location where you have a spy, and it's not a situation where somebody else is already there, you have the option of removing that spy, again, spending that spy, taking it off the board to draw a card. So that's a nice strategy too. Sometimes you don't care so much about reserving a spot or whatnot.
So that extra card in hand can be huge, right?
Yeah, your strategy might be card collection and
to give you more influence to buy your next card, or maybe you're really hunting for a card that might be in your deck. Or if you have Paul Atreides' special ability, he has this prescience where he can look at the next card coming anytime, and you might know, oh, I need that next card in my hand right now, so I'm going to take my spy off, and I want to be able to unleash that card. So yeah, that's an undervalued aspect of the game with the spies.
For sure. In most cases, I found myself, unless it's a space that I really, really want to make sure I always have access to, in most cases I find myself removing that spy for the card.
Yeah. So there's also, speaking of cards, there's also contract cards that are added to Uprising. Can you take a minute to talk about those? Or tiles?
But there's basically locations on the board that allow you to choose one of 2 revealed contract tiles. And most of these contract tiles are connected to a space on the board.
Right.
And so it might say, a good example might be the Swordmaster location.
Sure.
Or one of the spaces where you're collecting spice. So once you have this contract, the next time you go to the mentioned board space on the contract, you get to cash in that contract. And each contract will have basically a location and a reward. Mm-hmm. So it might say if you go to the Bene Gesserit space, you get to collect a water. Yeah. So the next time you send a worker to the Bene Gesserit space, you flip that over. It's considered a completed contract, and you get to take that water. So it's just another way to gain resources, to give yourself some strategy, some direction, that kind of thing. Yeah. So that's kind of one new component. Not a major component, but it does add a little bit of flexibility and direction in some cases. And there are a handful of cards in the deck that refer to contracts.
Right.
So if you have, I know there's intrigue cards, end-game intrigue cards that say if you have 4 completed contracts at the end of the game, you get a point.
Yep.
Different things like that.
Okay, so you got these contract cards or tokens. You've got the board spaces reworked. We've talked about spies. What are some of the other little differences in Uprising?
I guess the big one, or one of my favorites, is the worms.
Yeah, let's talk about the worms, because this is huge. And this is great, because, I was a little disappointed. I'm not going to lie. When I pulled out Dune Imperium for the first time, I'm like, what? No worms?
Where are the worms?
I want worms. I want 3D worms here. But it's interesting. We're going to talk about the movie shortly, but it's interesting because the worms don't play as much of a role in Dune Part 1 as they do in Dune Part 2. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting seeing, on the big screen, and we'll get there in a few minutes, about some of the worm scenes. But when you open up Dune Uprising, which sort of came out at the same time as the second movie, it's like, whoa, now we have the addition of these 3D worms here right on the table, right up in our face. So talk about the addition of the worms and what they add to the game. Yeah,
so the worms act like a unit of any other kind. at least in terms of what it's doing for you in the conflict. There are certain board spaces where when you go there, if you meet certain conditions that we don't need to go into, but if you meet certain conditions, you get access to a sandworm. And there's these little 3D minis that you can actually put in your area of the conflict.
Yeah.
And these worms are worth 3 strength in the conflict, which is bigger than any other unit available. So it's not completely game breaking. It's not massive, but it is a good, strong unit to put into the conflict. It doesn't, even though it's like intimidating to see the worms on the board, doesn't necessarily mean that person's going to win the conflict.
Correct.
There's definitely ways to pump up your troops and beat, a team with a worm.
But it's the threat of the worms, and we should say that only certain worms can come into play for certain players, or when we in the 3v3 version, only one team has access to them more frequently, right?
That's
we
right.
haven't even talked about that, but that's another addition. Is
in the standard game, everybody has access to the worms,
right?
But yes, in the 3v3 version, which we'll talk about in a minute, only one of the teams has access to them.
With an exception, I think there was a card when we played that allowed the other team to have access.
That's right,
yeah.
So put a worm in the conflict. It's worth 3 strength. It looks awesome, especially since, shout out to my buddy Matt at work. He painted mine for me.
Yeah,
they look amazing.
They look great.
So what they do is that if you win any reward in the conflict with a worm present on your team, you double your reward.
Huge.
Massive, yeah.
Huge.
And this is, I think, what people are concerned about when they talk about the game being a little swingy. There are less victory points available on the conflict cards.
Correct.
In Uprising than there were in Dune Imperium.
Yeah. There has to be, or it would be very swingy. Right?
Yeah. So you're getting more resources, more resources and more rewards in that way through the worms. And then in the later stages of the game, there are multiple victory points available, but they usually come with a cost.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, in the late game, there are conflict cards that if you win will get you a victory point, and then if you have a worm, it'll get you 2 victory points. But there's often a second victory point available on that card as well with a cost. So it'll say pay 6 spice for another victory point. Well, having the worm in the conflict basically says that you could do that twice. So you could pay 12 spice for 2 victory points there, but you'll never have 12 spice.
It's very rare.
Another one that is common is you can lift 2 spies off the board, 2 deployed spies, remove them from the board for an extra victory point. But you cannot have 4 spies on the board. You only have 3 access.
Exactly.
So all that being said, I think the maximum amount of victory points you'll realistically ever get on one conflict is 3. And you really have to set things up to have those resources to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But in most cases, once you get into the late game, I think players are getting 2 victory points off of those. There is one extra little thing here, though, and not worm related, is that the conflict cards have little symbols on them.
Right.
One of
I think
4?
there's 3 or 4. It's not important.
Not important. Yeah, there's either 3 or 4 symbols on these cards. And at the beginning of the game, everybody gets handed one, I forget what it's even called, but just it's a little card with a symbol on it. And it's either like the little kangaroo rat, it's an ornithopter, it's a crysknife.
Yeah,
those might be the 3.
You're just trying to collect sets.
Yeah.
Right, basically.
So as soon as you have 2 of the same symbol, you get to spend or flip those cards over for a victory point. So essentially, each conflict win is also worth half a victory point if you can match it with a matching symbol.
Right, and so that adds, like I mentioned earlier, the decision making on when to go hard to win a conflict. Well, that correct symbol that you're looking for adds a little more impetus, a little more motivation to get in the battle, right? We all start with one. So you can see, and that's open knowledge. That's open. Everybody can see, ooh, I can't let Matt win this battle because he's at 9 points or whatever, and that's going to push him over. So I need to win this conflict, right? So that adds a little more intrigue about a little more strategy about when and when not to enter the conflict and go for the win.
Yeah. And then finally, one of the big differences is that there's this 3v3 mode available
which was my entry point in the game. We played a 3v3 not too long ago, and you introduced me to the game, and I enjoyed that experience. I love the idea of getting that fifth and sixth player. So if you got maybe 3 couples, you can split it up and play together. And as long as you have like one experienced player on each team, you can teach the game to the others, right?
That's right.
They're doing their own thing. It's not like Star Wars Rebellion where they're just sort of riding along. They're doing their own plays and doing their own strategy.
I think that's an important distinction.
That's a very important distinction.
Is that like some games, and Star Wars Rebellion is the main one that comes to mind. If you're playing the 4-player variant of Star Wars Rebellion, essentially you're sitting with your partner on the same side of the table, and when you take a turn, you're just going to discuss and make a decision together.
Right. It's really one turn. It's not 2 separate turns.
Yeah. Whereas in Uprising, you're
sitting in a V formation, right?
Yeah, you're alternating around the table between teams. So to my left and to my right will be my opponents.
Exactly. There's one team sort of leader or captain, right?
Yeah, and they get to play the game a little bit differently. We're not going to go into those details, but it suffice it to say, everybody has their own point tracker, and everybody kind of plays the game as normal. You might just be in a situation where when you're trying to win the conflict, you might be choosing one person on your team to win the conflict.
Sure.
And helping them out. And there's spaces on the board where you can trade resources with your partners. And as the leader, anytime you're dealing with anything that has to do with the influence track or the conflicts, you can often choose which of your 2 partners
to move up
you're going to move up the track and or add troops to the
conflict. And you've got your own little track in front of you as the leader as well. Yeah.
So there's definitely a lot of teamwork happening and discussion, and you do this one this time, and I'm going to try to set you up to win the next one, and this turn you do this, and the next round we'll make sure that you have all the troops you need. Like, there's lots of strategizing,
but
and I could really use a spice right now to fulfill a thing that's going to get me a bunch of points. Can we make a trade? So there's all these teamwork things that are happening, but ultimately everybody does their own turn, moves up the track separately, gets their points separately, and at the end of the game, you're just adding up.
You add up all 3. So it's not like just 2 tokens going up the track. There's still 6 colors, 6 tokens moving, but you're going to add up. So your team, you might be the one that triggers the end game. You might have 11 points, but collectively my team might have more total than your team, right? 100%. So it's not about which person around the table finishes first. It's collectively which team has the cumulative higher value, which I find interesting. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I know that's a lot of information for those of you not familiar with Dune Imperium, but if you like any combination of worker placement, deck building, and conflict with not a ton of take that, but a bunch of interesting choices. The Uprising gives you the option of the traditional 4-player or the 3v3 option with all of those.
I will say for the 3v3, I've played it twice now.
Yep.
It is an epic, fairly long affair. It's a whole afternoon thing. You're probably talking 3 to 5 hours, depending on the group and how experienced the players are. It is really great. It's not my preferred way to play Dune Imperium Uprising, but from time to time, maybe once or twice a year,
change it up.
I'm totally down to play an epic 6-player version of this game.
It's just nice to have the flexibility in the option, right?
100%, yeah. So it is great. Big fan of the 3v3. Not necessarily my preferred way to play.
Yep. So at the end of the day, Matt, before we get into the movie conversation, what's your rating for these games?
I think Dune Imperium at like 9, and then you add the expansions. I think I had it at like 9.5, and I'm in the same neighborhood with Dune Imperium Uprising. I might even have put it at 10 on. These ratings, whether it's movies or films, it's such a
pretty
moving,
arbitrary, right?
And it really feels like a moving target depending on where you're at with other games and whatnot.
But this is your favorite, if not one of.
Yeah, as of right now, this moment, Dune Imperium Uprising is probably my favorite game of all time.
Nice.
And again, it's a moving target, and my next plan is to add at least one expansion, probably Rise of Ix, and see how that goes.
Well, you let me know. I'll join at the table for that for
Yeah,
sure.
sounds good.
Yeah, this is in my top 5 as well. I don't have as many plays as you, but every play has been very satisfying. And I don't own Uprising, but I'm looking to get my hands on it very soon. I played the 3v3 with you. I love the additions to the game, so it's it's in that 9.5, probably 9.5 for me at this point. And after a few more plays, it might get into the sacred 10 out of 10 realm for me.
Right.
So.
One thing I always want to make sure we do when we're talking about board games, or at least reviewing them in depth like this, is like, who is the game for and who is it not for?
Right.
I think it's important because, like, all of this stuff that we've been talking about...
It's all subjective, right? It's never going to be for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you haven't played this game, a lot of the stuff we've been talking about maybe didn't sink in. But I would definitely say it's on the heavier end of the medium weight games.
Yeah.
I don't think it's
just
like,
over the weight is just over 3 out of 5 on BGG.
Yeah. I would not call it a heavy game.
No.
But
certainly
a
not a light
medium
game.
doesn't feel quite right either.
Yeah.
It's kind of like almost a heavy game, maybe. So take that for what you will. There's definitely some conflict there. So if you really don't like conflict, what I would say is this is a primarily Euro game, but you really have to pay attention to what your opponents are doing. I think that's probably the best way that I could say.
That's a good summary, yeah.
You really have to, even when it's not your turn, and I think this is a positive, even when it's not your turn, you have to be hugely invested and paying attention to what your opponents are doing, because they may be putting troops in the conflict, they may be building their deck a certain way. You may realize that you don't stand a chance at winning a certain area of the game, and so you've got to pivot and do something else. So you really have to pay attention to what your opponents are doing, and I think that is the crux of whether or not you're going to like this game.
Yeah, if you want a game where you're just sort of doing your own thing, building your own thing in front of you with little to no regard of your opponents, maybe this isn't the game for you. If you like a game with absolutely no conflict, maybe this isn't the game for you. But again, if you love any combination of worker placement, deck building, a little bit of conflict, but not overly conflict, I think you'll love this game, and it kind of hits those sweet spots and blends them together quite well. So that's Dune Imperium Uprising. We love that game. We also love the movies. Well, let's pivot and talk about the movies, Matt. So why don't you give us a little breakdown, a little bit about, again, 2 games we talked about, 1.0, 2.0, same sort of thing with these films, directed by Denis Villeneuve.
Yeah, one of my all-time favorite directors, and he was kind of floating in the, do I love this guy? Is he one of my favorite directors or not? And I think Dune Part 2 solidified him as being right in the conversation in terms of all-time favorite directors. But, let's not jump ahead here. The reason we're reviewing both of these is because they're essentially kind of in the same way Lord of the Rings trilogy. They're essentially one movie. One
epic story, and it's got to be 3 parts. Yeah.
The first movie does, leave you hanging a tiny little bit in terms of it definitely feels like a to be continued. Similar to how Fellowship felt in Lord of the Rings. But the first movie, Dune Part 1, was released in 2021, kind of in the heat of the pandemic.
Right.
And it was released, simultaneously, digitally on HBO Max.
Which Villeneuve was not happy with
at
all. He's a big proponent. Like Christopher Nolan, I was like, get to the theater. See this on the biggest screen possible.
Yeah, if you missed either of these movies on the big screen, you just watch it at home. You did not get the full experience.
Yeah. Unless you have a killer home theater room, you missed out. Because, this is meant to be seen
definitely
on the
recommend,
big screen.
If you ever have the chance, definitely see these 2 movies on the big screen. Yeah, and this Part 2 was released not too long ago in Q1 of 2024. It's co-written and directed by Denis Villeneuve. And I'll have to take a deep breath here, but it stars...
loaded cast. Yeah.
Timothée Chalamet, Zendaya, Rebecca Ferguson, Oscar Isaac, Dave Bautista, Jason Momoa, Josh Brolin, Stellan Skarsgård, Javier Bardem, Florence Pugh, Christopher Walken, Austin Butler, and probably a slew of others that we could mention. Character actors and that are just incredible. So the cast is unbelievable when you kind of fly.
Yeah, and they're not all in both films, we should say. Some of them are only in part one, some of them are only in part two, but together, like, what a loaded cast.
Yeah, really unbelievable. In terms of the Academy Awards, it was nominated for Best Picture and went on to win 6 awards, including Score, Best Sound, Cinematography, Production Design, Film Editing, and Best Visual Effects.
And let me just jump in here because I gotta get this off my chest. But I was, 10 nominations, fantastic. But Denis Villeneuve did not get a Best Director nomination for the part one, and I really hope and think that will be rectified with part two, because he deserves a Best Director nomination for this film.
100%. Yeah, so as I said, it came out in 2021 during the height of the pandemic, and during the height of the lockdowns, which was kind of it had been delayed already a year.
Yeah, it was a weird time for a release, but in spite of that all, it did quite well at the box office, didn't it?
It did, yeah. So it still made $431 million worldwide. So really impressive, especially the fact that it was also released, like I said, simultaneously on HBO Max.
Yeah, and there was a bit of a risk here because part two wasn't a sure thing, right? It wasn't greenlit yet. They were waiting to see how part one did. Obviously, it did well enough that I think it was Warner Brothers, or they gave the green light to part two immediately after it did so well.
Yeah, and then part two obviously didn't disappoint. Made over $700 million.
Yeah, at the time of this recording, it's over $700 million and still out there available to see. Hey, and if you haven't seen this on the big screen yet, find a place to do so. I don't know if it'll still be on the big screen when we release this episode, but I've seen it 3 times, twice on the big screen and once on the bigger screen. I actually went to Toronto recently and saw this on the IMAX. Matt, it's playing on our local IMAX now. If you haven't seen it on the IMAX yet, get out there and see it.
I'm going to make an effort to go see it.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It just blew me away. Literally, like, my pants and my shirt were like, I was looking, they were like moving at some of these scenes. I was like, whoa, the sound was just incredible.
Yeah, definitely going to make an effort to go see it in IMAX. We're pretty lucky here in our town. Our local science center has an IMAX screen, and they'll often show these like tentpole major.
Yeah, sometimes a month
visually.
after they've been out, they'll keep it going on the bigger screen, which is great. But Denis Villeneuve, I said from the lead-in, which seems like hours ago, Denis Villeneuve for Prime Minister. He is one of my favorite directors. Matt, I know he's one of your favorite directors. Can we just take a minute to kind of shout out some of his other films before we get into the deeper spoilers of the newest release? So let me just take us, if you don't mind, Matt, I want to take us on a journey through his filmography. I've seen everything this guy has made. He made 2 films in the late 90s that really aren't essential viewing, August 32nd on Earth and Maelstrom. This is just him in his early sort of experimental phase. But his first sort of somewhat big film, still early, and I'm sure some people haven't seen it. And for any of our non-Canadian listeners, this is an important historical event in the life of Canada, as dark as it is. But he made a film called Polytechnique. Denis Villeneuve is a French-Canadian filmmaker, and he grew up in Quebec, very close to the site of the most harrowing, greatest mass shooting in Canadian history. And he wanted to kind of sensitively make a film talking about that event. And he did it in black and white, not to overemphasize the blood and the violence in the film, but it's a harrowing but important view. And that came out in 2009. And then in 2010, he made a film called Incendie, which to this day is still my favorite Denis Villeneuve film. And that was nominated for Best International Feature Film. So that was a bit of his coming out party in 2010. And since then, we've got maybe more familiar films. He did a double in 2013, double with Jake Gyllenhaal, Enemy and Prisoners. Then he made Sicario, which many of our listeners maybe have seen. Fantastic film. That's a 5-star film for me. A lot of people think his best film is Arrival. I'm a little mixed on that one. Maybe we'll down the road we can revisit that one, Matt.
I'm a huge fan of Arrival.
Okay, that'd be interesting. I'd love to discuss that. And then he did, sometimes I'm always cringing when you have a masterpiece of a film and someone tries to make a sequel. And Blade Runner, the original, is a masterpiece.
I was nervous when they announced Blade Runner 2049, and then I saw who was directing it, and I thought, okay, there's a chance this will be great.
And it blew me away. It's an incredible film.
And it's funny because it took a very, very similar trajectory in the popular eye as the original. Was that it was a little bit of a box office flop.
Right.
Didn't do great, but definitely has a cult following and is now kind of seen as a, I don't know if the word masterpiece is too strong, but it is definitely known as an incredible, like, iconic sci-fi film.
He's one of the few directors that has multiple masterpieces, in my opinion. I consider Incendie, Blade Runner 2049, Sicario, and now Dune Part 2. I consider those to be all 5-star films. Spoiler alert.
And for me, throw Arrival in the mix
for
as
you,
well.
Arrival as well. So definitely he's a director at the top of his game. He's on a nice little sci-fi run here with Arrival, Blade Runner, the 2 Dunes. He's going to return back, to announced to do Dune Messiah, which those of you who aren't familiar with the books, so Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2 are basically 2 films from the original Frank Herbert novel from the 60s. But one of the follow-up novels is Dune Messiah, and Denis said he wants to do one film to tackle that book. Things get really weird in the books that follow that. I think he's going to stop after Dune Messiah, but it'll be interesting. It's been greenlit. We're not sure if that'll be his next film. Maybe he'll do something in between to catch his breath. I haven't read Messiah. I've read the original, but I know the main characters age significantly between the book 1 and 2, so a couple years might probably be a good chance for him to kind of catch his breath and do something else before he taps Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya and the rest of the crew, get the band back together to head back to Arrakis again. So it'll be interesting to see what comes. But let's talk a little bit about why we love the film, Matt. Both Part 1 and Part 2. What are the key features that make this a masterpiece?
Yeah, I think so. Just to add a little bit more context to our conversation here, I have not read the book. Jason has. I have not seen the original movie. David Lynch's 1984.
I love Lynch, but
I tried over the years. I think I tried at least 3 times to watch that movie, and I don't think I ever got past like 15 minute mark. And then just recently, because I've fallen so in love with this universe, thanks in huge part to Denis Villeneuve, but also in huge part to a few of these games that we talked about already. I wanted to get a little bit more of an idea of this of the movie, so I basically sort of fast forwarded through and I watched a couple of scenes here and there. I wanted to get an idea for the aesthetic, the way the dialogue is kind of like laid out, the way that the visual effects are and that sort of thing, and where you are story beat wise. And having watched probably 4 or 5 scenes, 10-15 minutes each maybe, in the original Dune, I thought, okay, like the story beats are very, very similar, but also there are some really strange differences that I noticed, and you'll probably be able to speak to these more than me, having read the book.
And it's a long time ago since I've read the book. We're talking like back in high school. But, I do recall people saying for years that this book was unadaptable. It's impossible to translate this to the big screen. And David Lynch, kudos to him, he tried. He himself acknowledges this kind of failure. It's got a bit of a cult following. It's not unwatchable or awful, but to watch that and then to see what Denis Villeneuve has brought to the big screen. I mean, now mind you, he's got 30 years of technology, but
sure,
it's just incredible.
But I would argue just storytelling wise, and this is kind of where I wanted to start. Storytelling wise, I think Denis Villeneuve's instincts are just perfect. Because although I haven't read the books, I have a fairly good idea of the lore and the depth of what's going on in this universe. And I know that Denis Villeneuve has not mined the depths and not kind of provided all of this context. And I think he was able to do it in a way that still appeased the hardcore fans. Maybe not the preferred thing for the hardcore fans that have read and that are like super deep into the lore, because they're like, well, how come we don't know this and how come they didn't explore that?
It's impossible.
You just can't do it.
You can't do it.
Yeah, unless you're gonna do unless you're doing 5 seasons of
unless this was a lengthy series, a TV series. But I think for what he's taking the source material, and if you watch you can go on YouTube and watch interviews with Denis Villeneuve, and you find it very clear that this is a person who grew up loving this source material. He knows it inside and out.
Yeah.
So he's not just cutting and pasting something. Like, he's very passionate about this, and that passion shows on screen. The creative choices on what to include, what to cut out. I know some people, the biggest critique is, even in the new one, which is critically acclaimed as well as popular acclaimed, the biggest critique is that, it kind of jumps around a bit. We're here, and then all of a sudden we're here. How do we get here? How do we get from here to here? That never took me out of it because it's so visually sumptuous. Like, I'm just invested between the visuals and the music. And yeah, this is not a dialogue heavy film. That's not what it's about, but it's just one of those epic, like Lord of the Rings, like Star Wars. This is Empire Strikes Back for the next generation, this particular film, I think. And I love it. I can't say enough good things about this film.
Yeah, and I really think that the omissions that he made in terms of providing context and lore, I think still worked incredibly well. And he was able to fill in a lot of those gaps with just incredible visuals, right? Like when we visit the Harkonnens, and particularly Stellan Skarsgård's character, the Baron, you understand that this man and this faction is pure evil, and you have a pretty good idea of what's motivating them and what they're up to with just a few minutes of screen time. In the books, I'm willing to bet that there are probably chapters and chapters of backstory and how the Baron got to where he is, etc. How important is that to tell a great story and to lay out a movie the way that Denis Villeneuve has? Doesn't need to be explored.
Yeah, and Denis Villeneuve, he's a cinephile, right? He knows a lot of these classic films. Like, there are shots in the original and this one, like, yep, that's Apocalypse Now, right? where Stellan Skarsgård's character, he's just coming out of the bath, like, yep, this is taken right from it. Or these ornithopters, right? Like, I've never seen that in a movie before. It's pretty impressive when in the history of film you get to something say, I've never seen this in a film before. So it's a nice mix of, okay, this is paying homage to something, but this is Denis doing his own voice and creating something on his own at the same time. It really is the best of both. Like in part 2, like, for example, Austin Butler's character, he plays Baron Harkonnen's nephew, Fade Rautha. And when we go to Gidi Prime, and it's almost like a gladiator scene that's filmed intentionally in black and white. It just like, it gives this total different vibe and this darkness about just how psychotic this character is. Like, okay, this is going to get intense. The
introduction of this character was incredible. Everything on Gidi Prime was just like, I was just vibrating. And just like,
so immersive,
incredible. Yeah. And I will say, coming out of part 2, I remember saying, like, I haven't had a theatrical experience like that since The Matrix, when I was 16, 15 years old.
That's high praise.
I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. And I remember multiple times sitting on the edge of my seat, hands on my head, could not believe what I was seeing. It really is a masterpiece and just completely blew my mind.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking the last time I had an experience in the theater to like this degree was Blade Runner 2049, which was Villeneuve as well. I remember seeing that in theater and just being blown away by the world building and everything. And shout out to Hans Zimmer too. I mean, we got to shout him out, the score in both part 1 and part 2.
Even if you haven't seen Dune, you've heard this score.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
It's all over TikTok and Facebook, and it's being parodied, and that's a sign of an iconic work.
Yeah, and thematically, all right, we don't get as much of the theme maybe on the big screen. Obviously, in a book, you can get deeper into the themes and the characters, but I find it very interesting the meta themes about the positives and negatives of religion, and seeing someone as a messiah character and putting your faith and trust in them, and the consequences of that. And we should maybe talk about. Can we go into a little bit of kind of spoiler-ish territory, Matt?
Yeah,
before we land the plane?
Can just kind of wrap up our general thoughts about these movies, and then we can, for people that want to kind of go watch and come back, they can listen to the kind of the spoiler section of our show here. But yeah, I think Dune 1, I loved. Definitely felt incomplete, and there was a moment of fear there for the first month or so that part 2 wouldn't get made,
right?
Because I thought, like, this world is so incredible. The characters are great. He's done such a great job of setting up this massive conflict, and I was just so excited to see what came next. And I was hugely disappointed because I didn't realize it would end on such a, I don't know if I want to use the word cliffhanger, but it was more of a,
It's an abrupt stop.
It's an abrupt stop to the story, and you don't really know what comes next if you don't know the story, not having read the books.
Sure.
So yeah, I was a little bit disappointed the first time I saw it, and then the second time I approached it knowing where this was going to be, and it immediately became like, okay,
It elevates it.
This
for
is
sure.
an incredible setup and building of this world and these characters, and and in terms of Dune Part 2, like, immediately became one of my all-time favorite films, probably top 5.
Wow.
It just completely blew me away. I mean, primarily my number one kind of genre is sci-fi.
Sure.
So you're already hitting some notes there.
Hitting some of your sweet spots already. Yeah.
And I also love a good art house film, and I love great storytelling. And despite this being a huge tentpole, massive budget, sci-fi, star-studded theatrical experience, it still felt like art to me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's the beauty of this film, right? It's such a large scale, but so artistic.
I would
and
never
creative.
call a Marvel film or a superhero film art.
No.
But I have no reservations of calling this thing art and a masterpiece.
One of the many major differences between this and, I hate to even compare this to, in the same breath, MCU, is that, filming on location is a big deal for Denis. Right?
Absolutely.
He's filming on, like, you have an eclipse scene in Part 2. There was an actual eclipse happening.
No way.
So he said, we're going to schedule this scene
I didn't
when there's
know
an
that.
actual eclipse.
That is so
So
cool.
that's not even green screen or CGI. That's practical effects
That
as
is
much
so
as
cool.
possible.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I forget where I even heard this. I mean, I've listened to so many reviews and read so many reviews and kind of deep dives about these movies. But basically, they filmed on location in the desert. They basically built a little town.
Yeah.
And they had like these huts built up all over the place, and they had these trails so that you can actually walk, like padded down the sand, so that you could actually walk to all these different locations. And
it's incredible.
I mean, probably millions of dollars just to be on location.
But that
and
means a
set
lot to
this
Denis,
up.
and you respect that, right? And, part of the reason it's so immersive to us is because it was like that for the cast and crew. And so that translates on screen in our viewing experience because they're living in this world that they've literally created too. And the result is, over $700 million. So every million spent was worth it and then some.
To the point where another interview that I heard, they were talking about how when they needed to take multiple shots or retake shots of people walking in the desert, they leave footprints. And there is no natural way to cover up those footprints and take another shot. You just have to wait till tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because the winds will kind of
cover it
flatten
up.
things out. So a lot of times they would had to change the angle of a shot, or just like try to make sure they get it on the first shot. And if they weren't completely satisfied, they would wait till the next day to reshoot that. So you can imagine just logistically, but for me, it pays off. It pays off huge.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So maybe we can move into a little bit more spoilery talk here. I guess the big kind of subject, or one of the big subjects, is the contrast of Paul's character in Denis Villeneuve's Dune versus the perception of Paul's character in the original book and the perception of Paul's character in the original movie in 1984, where I think there's a small contingent of people that were upset. I don't know if upset's the right word, but taken aback of basically Paul turning into a villain.
Right.
At the end of Dune Part 2.
And that, in the book, that is sort of the arc and the trajectory. Villeneuve makes it a little more obvious in his character arc in the film. But I wouldn't say necessarily he's changed Paul's character as much as Chani's character. So where Chani ends up at the end of the second film is significantly different than her character in the book. And a lot of people have said they actually appreciate the creative changes Denis has done with her character, where she, at the end of part 2, she's just disgruntled. She's the one character that's resisting all of this zeal and fervor and this praise and worship, literally, for Lisan El Gaib, right? Like Javier Bardem, he's just like salivating over Paul's character throughout the film.
Yeah, and I think in the books, from my understanding, is she was fully on board. Yeah. She's like, he is the Messiah, fully on board. Let's like
whereas here she's sort of skeptical from the beginning. She's skeptical of all this religious fanaticism from the South, right? And it's kind of interesting. It parallels sort of North America, right? The further south you go, the more religious fundamentalism you find. Apologies to those of you who maybe live in the southern United States that are listening, but that seems to be a reality in our geographical space as well as on Arrakis. But she's just very skeptical of Javier Bardem and all of his followers that are just uncritically gushing over him. And there's this internal turmoil too in Paul. Like, he's flat out says throughout this film, like, no, I'm not the Messiah. I'm not the Messiah. But his mother, Rebecca Ferguson character, is starting to sort of fan the flames of this too, right? To sort of instigate this holy war. And, that's where things end off at the end of part 2 is, right, okay, well, lead them to paradise. And you've got all these other factions and houses ready to come down on Arrakis as the Emperor, plays by Christopher Walken.
Yeah.
Maybe if there's a minor miscast, it is Christopher Walken's character. But it's Christopher Walken,
he didn't have
right?
enough to do that.
No,
Exactly.
But that's where things end going into now Dune Messiah, is that, they're about to unleash this holy war, not only against the Harkonnens, but the rest of the houses.
Right. And
as Paul strategically aligns himself, he basically abandons Chani's character for strategic political purposes, takes the hand of the Emperor's daughter, played by Florence Pugh. This is not the first movie where Timothée Chalamet has abandoned one girl and taken Florence Pugh. Call back to Little Women, if anybody's seen the most recent adaptation of that. It's kind of interesting to see those two characters in the same place.
But just going back to Zendaya's character, I think that almost her reactions to everything is a huge reason why he was viewed in the way that he was by audiences. Because if she was fully on board, we might have been too, as an audience,
right?
With the whole praising and kind of Paul being this Messiah.
Yeah, she
didn't seem to buy it. For the most part. And I think that was enough to plant a seed of doubt and have us understand it. Now, there was a couple of interviews that I heard, or one specifically of Denis Villeneuve, talking about how in the books, at the end of the books, everybody was talking about how great of a hero and the hero's journey that Paul had taken. And Frank Herbert,
yep.
Frank Herbert was disappointed in the perception of Paul's character, and I think that was the reason he wrote Dune Messiah. And
yeah, to make it very clear though, this is not a hero character. This is someone we're putting on a pedestal and has embracing that power and that persona for nefarious purposes. That becomes more of a villain. And Denis tried to make that a little more clear in the films,
for sure. Yeah. And I think that's that clarity that we maybe didn't get in previous iterations.
Yeah.
And again, I use the word perception because obviously his Frank Herbert's goal was not to have that be the perception.
No,
but ultimately
it was a critique of some of the dark side of religious fanaticism. That's a big part. And it's a story of colonization too, certainly. I mean, the Fremen signify the indigenous people groups that are being colonized for their resources. So, he's being very critical of a lot of things that are front and center in our world today. And these are big issues. Sometimes we can get lost in the visual sumptuous of this film, but at its core, there's some very interesting, deep issues that are worth discussing. And so kudos to both Frank Herbert and Denis Villeneuve. And nice try to David Lynch. Thanks for coming out.
He did like from what I saw, he did a couple interesting things,
sure.
But
he wasn't the right guy.
It wasn't the right. Yeah. It wasn't the right approach. I think either. You really needed to I think basically tear down the story and just do a really good job of picking and choosing what lore and what details you're going to insert into the movie and what you're going to leave out.
Yeah.
And I think that David Lynch just tried to do way too much.
Yeah, he bit off more than he can chew. But hey, that's Lynch, right? He'll run with something as far as he can and
You
make
gotta
it
give him
weird.
credit for taking the big
gotta
swing.
get him. Yeah, he definitely is not one shy away from taking big swings. Well, we've spent a lot of time here on Arrakis today talking about these games and films which we love, and hopefully you've enjoyed, or if you've not, hopefully you'll explore the Dune universe a little more. The only thing left is our ratings, right? So why don't we give our ratings?
Yeah, before we move on to our ratings and wrap things up, I thought maybe we could take a few minutes to call out some of our favorite moments, ideas, shots, characters, if there's anything you wanted to kind of just gush over.
Do we have another hour?
Yeah, we have gone long, so we should wrap this up sooner than later. But there's just so much fun stuff here.
I'll tell you what, all three viewing experiences, but in particular the IMAX, and seeing it third time, you know what's coming.
Right.
But it's still so immersive. Like the scene where Paul is riding on the sandworm.
Like the first one?
Like in part two, where he's like his final
The first time
coming
he
of
rides
age.
the
Yeah, the first time.
yeah.
Yeah.
Incredible moment.
Yeah, and you're
Like,
like, you
just
know
chills.
this is not...
I have chills right now thinking about it.
Yeah, like goosebumps head to toe. Like the sound, the visuals. You forget that this isn't actually happening. You think this is literally happening because it's so well shot. And obviously, there's visual effects galore to pull that off, but it's so seamlessly and perfectly done. You actually think that these worms are literally live on location because it's just so immersive, right? You're right there with them. It's
such
incredible.
an incredible job with scale.
Yes.
And not just scale of the visuals, because obviously the massive... You don't really understand how big these worms are until you finally see him riding it.
Yep.
But I mean scale of the moment. And anytime you're talking about scale, you don't understand how big something is unless you can actually contrast it against something that you understand in your mind. And so again, when you see him get on and actually ride it, in comparison to the size of the dunes and the desert, and in comparison to the size of Paul, it is absolutely breathtaking. But to bring it back and talk about the scale of the moment, you don't understand how huge of a moment this is unless you see the looks on the faces of Zendaya, the looks on the faces and the words of Javier Bardem when they all stand up. That's too big. That one's too big.
Yeah.
And they realize that it's the
grandfather worm, the biggest they've ever seen.
The biggest one, the mother of all the worms. And they're like, oh my God. And they all stand up and they go, that's too big. And that is a moment that provides a scale of the moment that is just a perfect little touch that makes all the difference.
Yeah, because even for them to be horrified, they're experienced worm riders to think, oh my goodness, this might be even a challenge for me. And here he is, first time.
Paul's in trouble.
Yeah, just how pivotal a moment this is. And that's a moment where maybe people that were on the fence, when they see him taming this worm, like, okay, this is literally the Messiah. This is the Lizana.
Yeah. Absolutely. I know, speaking of little moments or little details, and being able to understand what's going on at a deeper level with just visuals, because when you're reading a book, you live in people's minds. You know their thoughts because you read their thoughts. Can't do that in a movie. And one moment that really made that super clear to me was, and I'm sure they talk about in the book, worm riding extensively and the logistics of it.
Yeah.
We don't get any of that.
No.
But one little moment when he takes the maker hooks and he hooks it into the scales and he pulls it up. And then you see that having those scales lifted makes it so that, and I was able to decipher this in my own head after the second time watching it. The first time I was just too blown away by the moment, but the second time I'm paying more attention to the details. And I'm seeing that he's raising those scales, and that's the reason that the sandworm can't dive down, because it needs to close off those vents, I guess, for lack of a better term, to be able to go under under the sand, I guess. So it is those maker hooks. It aren't just meant for the character to be able to stand on, but also forces the worm to stay above ground. So that's just one tiny, tiny, tiny little detail that's never discussed, never talked about, and a lesser director would have probably had a 2-minute dialogue scene explaining some of this stuff.
Christopher Nolan might have too.
Yeah, a lesser director, a lesser storyteller might have spent 2 minutes of weird.
We don't need all this
dialogue.
exposition, right? He respects the audience enough to know that I'm just going to throw this visual cue in and trust in the knowledge of the audience. He's not pandering or spoon feeding the audience. He's like, they'll understand this, they'll get this.
Absolutely. Yeah. So anyways, that's just a moment, a tiny little detail that I thought I needed to call out.
Well, one more little moment before we wrap up. Like, I remember sitting down, settling in, all pumped up, and within the first 5 minutes, that opening scene where we see the Harkonnens, they've adapted to the Arrakis planet, where they're the anti-grav stuff where they're flying. Cool. I'm just like, oh man, okay, this is going to be epic.
In immediately.
Yeah, I'm all in right away. 5 minutes in, and you're seeing them sort of floating and climbing the rocks, and you know, not wanting to upset the sand, knowing that Shai Hulud, the worms are out there. So they've got these sort of anti-grav boots on or suits on where they can literally float up in the air. Just incredible.
So
just
cool.
Incredible.
Visually, story-wise.
So iconic. Yeah.
Amazing.
So many indelible scenes from that film that are etched into my
love
memory.
All the scenes where they're like kind of guerrilla style taking down harvesters and stuff with the rocket launchers and all that stuff. It's just like staged so well. When it comes to action scenes, understanding the geography of things I think is really important. And we know, like, the big legs come down and they hide behind the legs so that they can't get shot. And then a leg comes up and they're like, they got to take off and run to the next one. And just, like, tactically and in terms of geography and the way things are laid out, you're just able to follow along, know what's going on, and you just learn so much about all these little details that kind of build up the bigger world. Yeah.
Kudos to the cinematographer, Greg Fraser. I mean, we haven't shouted him out. This is not simply Denis. This is his cast, his crew. This is the score of Zimmer, the cinematography of Fraser, the loaded cast. They all had a role to play. And the end result is a masterpiece. And, I gave Dune Part 1 sort of this 9 out of 10 because it was slightly incomplete, but I saw this was going to be incredible. Having read the book, knowing that, it's a good place to pause the story, but seeing Part 2 and watch them back to back now, I've given, Part 2 like at least 9.5 or relatively close to 10, right? It's hard to give it a perfect mark, but it's not that 9.8 out of 10. It's right there. Right?
Sure, yeah. And to be honest, I rewatched Part 1 after seeing Part 2, and it elevates Part 1 even.
Oh, absolutely. Without a doubt.
There's one moment in Part 1 that especially hit me a little bit harder that didn't hit me in the moment. But after having seen Part 2, I thought was just a perfectly incredible little moment. And it's a very quiet little dialogue scene between Paul and his father, Duke Leto Atreides, played by Oscar Isaac, who's one of my all-time favorite actors. I think he's incredible. He was talking about how Paul, down the road, may or may not have to kind of be the head of the household and the head of Arrakis, because they're going to Arrakis to lead there. And talking about how much responsibility Paul may have to take on his shoulders. And then Paul seemed a little bit reluctant.
I told my father I didn't want this either. I wanted to be a pilot. You never told me that. Your grandfather said, a great man doesn't seek to lead. He's called to it. And he answers. And if your answer is no, you'll still be the only thing I ever needed you to be. My son.
And I thought those words were just like so amazing and so powerful, especially made more powerful by the fact that in the second movie, Paul, at least for the first 3/4 of the movie, is motivated by revenge. And he mentions that at the end of the first film, I think, because Rebecca Ferguson's character says, your father didn't believe in revenge. And Paul says, well, I do. And that is, I mean, it's another nice little scene that gets elevated by the fact that in the second one we see how motivated Paul is, and how hard he works for that revenge.
Yes.
So yeah, it's just a moment that in the first time around I just didn't really notice that much.
Yeah, it fills in the gaps.
The second time around, having watched part 2, and that's just, again, one tiny little dialogue scene, one little moment that builds this bigger world. And I just found that he picked the perfect amount of explaining lore and building this world that he needed to, for us to just be fully invested in these characters.
Well said.
Great. So thank you for hanging out with us today. Hopefully you enjoyed our chat about all things Dune. If you disagree or have something to add, please email us at dicecameraactionpod@gmail.com. Until next time, stay hydrated.
Thanks, Matt. Take care, everyone.